Trystie's Quest, or Kit, King of the Pigwidgeons. By Greville MacDonald. Chapter 14. The character of squirrels. Davy learns to ride. He reaches Gallybird's hole with the recorder. Before I can tell more of the story, it is necessary that everyone should know certain things about squirrels, otherwise subsequent events will be hardly credible. From what Davy, Kit, and Trystie tell me about their good friends, Sir Squirrel and his dame, it is quite clear that whatever part of the world squirrels belong to, and whatever their fashion of coat and tail, whether they are sturdy English red squirrels, or grey Siberians, or flying squirrels from India, or American chipmunks, they really must be, every one of them, of Irish ancestry. Squirrels are the stanchest of friends and will take the most terrific leaps from tree to tree, as well as from metaphor to metaphor, all out of kindness and trustiness. Then they are the most faithful parents and home lovers. No gadabouts they for all their fine leapings. They never change their wives or their husbands all through their lives, as so many people do who live in trees. The little ones, quite as sensibly, never change their fathers and mothers, not even when they grow up and become fresh fathers and mothers once a year to a fresh litter of babies. Then again, it must be because they have Irish blood in them, though our own red ones are not the less English to the very tale of them, that, while they store up great quantities of horse-chestnuts and beechnuts and filberts for the winter, they hide away their larders so cleverly that, when winter comes, they themselves often cannot find them. You may see the little red creatures darting about, tails following fast behind, on the snow from one big root to another, searching for the plentiful hoard, and, if you have sharp eyes like our boys, you may then see, nearly as carefully hidden and high up in the fork of some beech tree, a domed nest, or dray, as it is called, with a little round doorway below, and out of the doorway you may see Mrs. Squirrel or one of her children, now about 6 months old, nearly grown up indeed, peeping and watching very anxiously the husband and father as he hunts for the family larder. Then another point accounted for by their being so Irish is that they are always ready for gymnastics, dances, and games, even if tomorrow is rent day and they've lost every one of their larders. Mr. Squirrel too always chooses to dance with his own lady rather than with anyone else. Last, and perhaps the most important of all, is that they know more about fairies than any other people. In olden days, indeed, the Norse people believed the squirrels were the messengers from unseen and powerful spirits who helped mortals in their difficulties and troubles. So our squirrel's intimacy with the fairyfolk is quite as ordinary a thing as an Irish leprechaun's. Having explained this much, nothing that follows will be very surprising. Upon a certain evening Davy's own squirrel sat by his wife. He was now Sir Squirrel since a certain visit to the Fairy Queen. It was after supper, and the 4 children were curled up in each other's arms pretending to be asleep. "Dame, dear," he said, "the Queen has given that Davy to me to look after. But for him, you know, you'd have had to go into mourning like a stoat in the winter, and bring up all the darling squirrelies as melancholy orphans." "May the good Queen bless the child for it," piously exclaimed Lady Squirrel, putting her paws up for one moment and looking into the treetop. "But let's have a romp first, and then I'll go to sleep while you talk about him." So they had a mad scamper up to the top of the highest beech. They lived in the copse behind Jonas's cottage, you know, and kept watch on the old man's doings with timid eyes. The scamper over, they fetched from their larder at the roots of the tree a few fresh green hazel nuts, which they would eat only while the squirrelies were asleep, because such things are apt to disagree with young stomachs. Then, as they sat up, one on each side of the trim nest, cracking, scraping and eating the nuts, a big hawk moth perched on top of it and told them she was sent by the Queen to say that Davy's brother was in trouble and they must go and find him. "What can we do?" asked Lady Squirrel, licking the tip of her tail contemplatively. If we go and leave the nuts in the nest, we shall have to stop and see that the darlings don't eat them and get toothaches inside. If I let you go alone you'll be up to some foolishness and get shot again. And it's no use for me to go without you, when the only place I can ever find the way to is where you and the squirrelies are." She turned to the nest and then saw 4 little red heads poking out, each of them with one eye tight shut to make its mother think it was fast asleep, but the other wide open and winking like fun. So there was only one thing to do. They must all go together, all 6 of them, on a lovely night scamper. Up they ran, father, mother, and 4, along to the end of the outstretched bough, and then a glorious arrow-like leap, safe on the next door tree. 3 trees they put behind them in as few seconds. Then Mother and Four rested while Sir Squirrel sped to the topmost point to get his bearings. They had to avoid most carefully Jonas's garden, because of his black cat, and make for the farm by way of the fringe of stunted shrubs and trees and ragged hedges that lie between the uprising downs and the wheat fields. Here they met hundreds of birds asleep in the shrubs and trees, chaffinches, yellowhammers, the common and reed buntings, and starlings love such places. But they leapt so silently that none were disturbed, not even those easily roused and timid creatures the wood-pigeons in the tree attics. Crossing the road at last, they only just escaped attack by a pack of prowling, vicious stoats, who for once were taken too much by surprise at sight of a whole family of respectable squirrels out for a midnight escapade, that they missed their chance and a supper. Happily ignorant of the danger they had run, the squirrels arrived safely at the farm. Now, the father squirrel himself, it will be remembered, had been at the farm once before. Though on that occasion he nearly died of fright and a torn back, he had kept one eye wide open, and, with perception as instantaneous as his leapings, had in few seconds spied out all the old house's possibilities. The same night that Davy and I made a bed for him in the tool house, he had before setting out for home, and in spite of his sore, stiff back run round the house to find out where Davy slept, the old timbers were as easy to climb as any tree. Davy, he discovered, slept with Kit in one of the attics. The chief fear Lady Squirrel now had was our own Prussian cat. But where love and duty lie, everything else must give way, and of the two risks, toothache inside or tabberteeth outside, the latter to her illogical ladyship seemed at this moment the less. So across the road they shot, father, mother, and Four, under the gate, up the brick path, round to the back, like 6 streaks of dull red lightning, up to the dormer window, inside which they sat up in a row, demurely trimming their brushes. Davy was sitting up in bed, softly crying to himself because Kit was gone, and he did not know where. Davy kept thinking he heard him coming back and wondering if he should go and find him. Having Kit for elder brother, he had hardly learned to take the initiative in anything. But his trouble was at an end as soon as the squirrels, father, mother, and Four, came and sat in the window, for Davy knew his little old friend at once. You might think that none of them was any better off so far as Kit was concerned, seeing that they knew nothing of his difficulties. But Sir Squirrel was all his life making collections of odd things besides nuts and food, and hoarding them in strange larders that none but himself could find, though he often forgot where they lay. These stores, indeed, were queer and often crooked bits of information. They often needed to be fitted together before they were of any use, and sometimes a necessary bit in the puzzle would be missing. Sir Squirrel whispered to his wife. Then Lady Squirrel fetched a green hazel nut out of her pouch, cracked it, and scraped it clean with her pearly little teeth. Sir Squirrel took it in his 2 paws, leaped on to Davy's little bed, and offered him the tempting morsel. Davy ate it gladly, and soon discovered that either he had become deliciously smaller, or the tree people were decidedly bigger than he had ever before realized. "Oh, Sir Squirrel," Davy had no hesitation in asking, "please do take me to find Kit. I think he's lost for good, if you don't help him." The 5 creatures now jumped down to the floor and sat up in a row by the bedside, where Sir Squirrel joined them. The little room had somehow become such a great place to Davy that the window looked as if it were halfway up the downs. Sir Squirrel shut his eyes and looked from side to side, up and down as if hunting in his brain larders for things to fit together in the puzzle question, "Where is Kit?" "I've got them all, Dame," he said at last to his wife. "I saw the boy leave his recorder with old Jonas, when I made him laugh. Then, of course, he went up to the magic gable in the loft. Then, did you see that bevy of foam fairies scudding over our tree at sundown? One of them got caught. I rushed up to help her. But when I pulled a caterpillar off her, she laughed like a fairy bubble bursting and whispered as she flew away after the others, 'I'm after the others to find Kit. Such fun we're having. Then there's that bad old ash tree where the Pigwidgeons dwell. Kit's been there before and would have to go again. Then the last bit in the puzzle, there's that nasty, smelly place, Gallybird's Hole. That's where we'll find him, Dame.'" Davy understood every word, and somehow knew that what his mother had said about his riding his squirrel was to come true. He slid down the round leg of his cot, and said, "May I please mount, Sir Squirrel?" The kind creature stretched his tail out and crouched down. Davy, though he had a little difficulty with his long nightshirt, managed to get astride. Then the thoughtful squirrel turned his tail forwards over Davy, and the child buried his hands in its deep fur and caught hold of the firm and bony tail to hold on by. Then they leaped to the window and down the thick old wisteria branches that here cover the house, raced away to the hedgerows, back into the copse, swarmed up a great beech tree, then leaped from branch to branch and tree to tree, till they found themselves in Jonas's garden. Oh, it was such a glorious rush of a ride as never boy had before. And such a happy one, for was not Davy, for once, going to help his big brother? The only one of the 7 who had any difficulty at all and who did not quite enjoy things was Sir Squirrel himself. There was, of course, nothing but happiness in having his protector Davy on his back, and the weight was a small point. The difficulty he experienced was in taking wide leaps without his tail streaming and steering behind him. He was obliged to let Davy keep tight hold of it. 2 or 3 times he forgot that he must not let his tail go, but the moment Davy felt the pull backwards on his hands, he let the tail slip through. The only difference was that in these leaps he would be lying back on his mount, and his hands would beg gripping the tail flying behind him. Oh, it was the oiliest ride boy ever had. No cross-country gallop on horseback ever came near it, but Sir Squirrel was quite English in his anxiety about a correct seat and the hang of a tail. He was on the whole glad it was night, so that no one of importance would see his unusual mode of leaping. He told Davy afterwards that he felt exactly like Lord Curdie, and sorrier for the noble dog's shortcomings than ever before. But, now they were at Jonas's cottage, 2 things had to be contrived: first, how to avoid the black cat, and second, how to get in and fetch the recorder. There is one safe place in every cottage garden where a cat is afraid to go. It is in the middle of the well's windlass. The one nursery rhyme that every kitten learns is, "Ding dong bell, pussy in the well." It is sufficient to instill a wholesome fear of water into the kittenish mind, though a kitten is too restless ever to get further than this in the rhyme. The mother cats pretend they know yards more of it, but they can't remember about Tommy Stout, or they wouldn't be so much afraid of sitting over the well. So they all swarmed up onto the windlass, where immediately the 2 old squirrels had some whisperings together that Davy could not understand. The result was that the boy had to dismount and sit quietly down beside the others on the windlass, holding on if he liked by Dame Squirrel's tail tip. The cottage door was very old, and one corner below was enough worn away to let a big rat through. Straight as a bullet for its billet shot Sir Squirrel, straight as a bullet he went through. But, unlike any bullet I ever saw, he swarmed up the dresser, found the recorder which, being a fairy one, instantly became adapted to anybody's mouth who needed it, brought it down and back to the hole in the door. To anyone but a squirrel it would have been a puzzle how to get it through. But the way was clear enough. Into the wide end of the recorder Sir Squirrel stuffed his tail. Cautiously creeping through the hole into the garden again, the precious pipe was thus drawn after him and came safely through. It was then detached at once, because Sir Squirrel could not bear to look ridiculous before his squirrelies unless it was quite necessary. He put the recorder down, leapt upon the windlass, bade Davy mount again, and took the child to the cottage door. There Davy dismounted and picked up the pipe. Away again sped Davy on Squirrelback, holding on by one hand now, as he had the recorder to carry. They took the same roundabout and glorious way to the farm. A very common rhyme in squirrel nurseries is this: straightest roads are always longest when the day is done, dancing boughs are always strongest when the work is fun. Perhaps it's truer than wiseacres know. But this time it was quite necessary to go by the copse, for it was time the little squirrelies were fast asleep, and their lady mother must stay behind to protect their insides by eating up the green hazelnuts herself. Davy was taken into the nest, so warm and sweet and soft a home it was, and stayed just long enough for his friends to crack and scrape 2 more green nuts for him to eat. A little more of the fairy food was quite necessary, I suppose, if Davy was to keep safe when he got inside Gallybird's hole. Davy was glad to mount the creature's soft back again and to feel the strong, quick-leaping limbs in front of and behind him. For a moment, after landing from a leap, Sir Squirrel would squint round at him with one eye to see if the child was happy, and then with a cheery hold tight, Davy would be off again. But now they took a beeline to the farm, and made straight for the barn. In they darted at the cat's hole of the big door and up the ladder at the gable end. The magic skylight stood open. In a very few seconds Davy dismounted at the edge of Gallybird's hole. There, and although they lost no time in deciding what use they were to make of the evil place, I must seem to leave Davy and the squirrel while I take up again the thread of Trystie's discoveries. In passing, however, I must mention that in the morning we again found Kit fast asleep on the gable platform in the barn and carried him back to bed. While we were undressing without waking him, we noticed a curious musty smell about his clothes like decayed wood. As the mother shook out his smock, there fell and ran away a most evil-looking spider. Davy, you can imagine how bewildering it was, had a lot of short reddish hairs sticking about his homespun woolen nightshirt. Both he and Kit remained in bed all day sleeping in the most unusual manner. Curdie was nowhere to be found. End of this chapter.